President Biden takes his first steps to address gun violence, why the vaccination rate may go down in the next few weeks, and Love Hate 8 to end the week. Friday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Friday, April 9th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Good morning.
Schönen Freitag, mein Freund. How are you? Friday vibe check?
Good. No, there's zero vibe right now at 6 a.m.
Zero vibe? I know. I hear you. Little housekeeping just before we go, get moving here. Working on our Spotify, what do you call it? Our Spotify summer playlist. It's coming along great. It's going to be very long. Our summer Need to Know playlist. It's already clocking in at like a couple hours, and I've just really started. Also, speaking of Spotify, that podcast that we did last week, was that last week? About sort of the COVID silver linings. That's got really good placement on Spotify right now. If you want to check that out, it's on the front page of Spotify's news and politics podcast page. So if you haven't listened to that, you can check that out. And what else? Oh, just another reminder, as always, that you can email us. That email address is need2know@cheddar.com. Need2know@cheddar.com. Those emails go right to Jill and I, and we read them.
A shout out to Courtney Wolf, who got from Cheddar, who got us that placement on Spotify.
Whoop, whoop. Huge.
She's really like crushing and her job, and I feel like it's not even her job to do it. She's just it's like this extra thing that she's taken on, and we really appreciate it.
Shout to Courtney for sure.
Okay. President Biden announcing a number of modest executive actions on gun safety that do not require congressional approval, calling the country's gun violence epidemic a, quote, international embarrassment. The president instructed the Justice Department to crack down on ghost guns, the hard-to-trace firearms that can be bought in a kit without a background check, and stabilizing braces that turn pistols into short-barreled rifles. The shooter in Boulder actually used one of those. Biden also nominating a well-known gun control advocate to run the ATF, which has been without a permanent chief since 2015.
If you're wondering why the federal agency in charge of guns hasn't had a permanent director in 6 years, this from the New York Times. In 2006, lawmakers allied with the NRA enacted a provision that made a position of ATF director subject to Senate confirmation, basically hobbling that job. As a result, only one director, Todd Jones, who was nominated by President Obama, has been confirmed to that job over the last 15 years. So there's a reason for that. But yeah, so I watched Biden yesterday. Good on him for doing something. This is pretty marginal stuff, you know. You need Congress to do anything big on an issue this big, and that's not happening anytime soon. Honestly, you know, Jill, you said the other day it wouldn't happen because of the filibuster. It may not. I don't even know if it would happen without the filibuster. I'm not sure there's 50 votes in Congress to do universal background checks, even though 90+% of people support it. I'm not even sure. I think there's probably some moderate Democrats that would balk at it.
Biden's actions on guns came during a particularly upsetting week of gun violence in this country. A former NFL player, Philip Adams, allegedly killed 5 people and himself in South Carolina on Wednesday. Before that, a mother and her 2 daughters were shot and killed by the mother's ex-boyfriend in Brooklyn. He also killed himself. On the same day, 2 brothers in Dallas carried out a murder-suicide pact that left 6 members of one family dead. They wrote in a suicide note that they were severely depressed and laughed at the ease with which they could get a gun to carry out the plan.
You know, this is the real story of America's gun violence epidemic, Jill, right? I mean, it travels through these, you know, posh suburbs of Charlotte, the projects in Brooklyn, these working class immigrant neighborhood in Dallas, the 100 or so Americans who are shot and killed every day. It's mostly in stories like this. A jilted ex-boyfriend, an upset neighbor, a mentally ill family member. Not that most or even many mentally ill people are violent. But the thing that ties them together is the ease at which all those people can access a gun, right? That's the only thing they really have in common. There was a study from Everytown that looked at shootings between 2009 and 2018. I thought was pretty interesting. According to that study, domestic violence was a part of most mass shootings. In at least 54% of all of these mass shootings, the perpetrator shot a current or former intimate partner or family member in addition to others. When I worked on the national desk, the assignment desk at NBC, a job that you also had, you probably sort of remember this task. A big part of that job was chasing down these stories and to find out, quote unquote, if we cared, right? If they rose to the level of national news. And the rule of thumb in the media is fairly simple. It's very crude, but it's like unspoken, but it's pretty simple. It's if the shooting happened in a public place and the shooter didn't know the victims, then it becomes news. If the victims and the shooter knew each other, generally speaking, it's not news. But the people who die in those cases aren't any less victimized by gun violence than the folks who died in Boulder, for instance, or Atlanta for that matter.
And, I just wanted to mention one of our listeners who works in the field of social work. She had written in
Hmm.
a couple of weeks ago to us because I think she thought that some of what we were saying about mental illness and gun violence was sort of stigmatizing people with mental illness. And she made a really good point as well in terms of victims. She said, there was one quote that she wrote that I thought was particularly effective. She said, most people with mental illness, not violent, and only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals living with a serious mental illness. In fact, people with severe mental illness are over 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than the
Sure.
general population. Again, just this idea of, victims are victims, and I just think it's important to remember, and
Absolutely.
also points to how complicated this issue is to solve. I guess you could
Yeah.
say what Biden did a decent first step, but to your point, just it's not really going to do much to solve the overall issue of why this country is the only one where we see these mass shootings. Uh,
Right.
especially at the frequency that we're seeing them.
Absolutely.
All right, Carla, let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. The allocation of Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses is expected to drop dramatically next week as a result of that Baltimore factory that accidentally ruined millions of doses. It is a big setback to the national vaccine drive, now averaging about 3 million doses a day. Pfizer and Moderna shipments remain steady, and the CDC says more than a quarter of U.S. adults are now fully vaccinated.
We're making progress, but yeah, that Johnson & Johnson news, not great, not great. Also, I wanted to mention this: Notre Dame, the latest college to come out and say that students have to show proof of vaccination if they want to be on campus in the fall. We haven't really mentioned this, but this is becoming a trend here. There's similar policies in place from Cornell, Rutgers, Brown, and Northeastern. From what I've gathered, I'm sure there are more. Those are just some of the big ones. This is like a somewhat controversial. I don't really know why, though. I mean, I had to show proof of, I think, vaccination for like meningitis and measles when I went to college, right? Didn't you? Wasn't that a thing?
I believe so. And, look, and I think we have to, in order to send my daughter to school, we have to have proof that she's been vaccinated against those things. I think
Hmm.
it's the emergency use authorization that makes it a little bit more controversial. If these
Ah, yeah,
companies like Pfizer and Moderna actually file for full FDA approval, which we're hearing that at least Pfizer is planning to do, I think that gives these colleges a little bit more teeth, and businesses and whoever else
sure.
wants to mandate vaccines. I think it gives them a little bit more teeth.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Also, before we move on, I just want to talk about Chile for a second. It's a really interesting cautionary tale. We were talking about Brazil yesterday. Chile as the best vaccination drive in the Americas, pretty much far and away, but they are getting hammered right now by a new wave. Why is that? Well, it seems like what's happening is they're getting this sort of false sense of security down there, and people are easing up too soon. And I think it's just a sort of example of why you really need the vast majority of the population to be fully vaccinated before you can, start licking the subway poles, as we say here. Uh, right? Like it's sort of like Israel. Like you need to actually everybody has to be vaccinated, and you have to wait for the immune response to kick in before you can start to really ease up. So I just thought that was worth noting.
I think that our new promotional picture should be you licking a subway pole.
Jill, I will
Like in
gladly, I
like
will
four
gladly take
months when
this.
we're on the other side of this thing.
I will gladly get on the 6 train with you and lick a subway pole in the if it creates a good picture for the podcast art. Yes.
Where am I? Day 9 of the Derek Chauvin trial brought more compelling testimony for the prosecution. A pulmonologist testified that George Floyd did in fact die from a lack of oxygen to his brain, vehemently denying the defense's argument that Floyd's cause of death was from drugs or an underlying medical condition. Dr. Martin Tobin, a star witness for the prosecution, said, quote, a healthy person subjected to what Mr. Floyd was subjected to would have died as a result of what he was subjected to.
Bingo. That's the money line right there. Did you watch anything yesterday? This guy was the best witness yet. I think he was really strong for the prosecution. He was just very good. A lot of time when you have medical experts testifying at these trials, like they're just very sort of dry and they don't, they talk like doctors talk. But this guy was really very clear in explaining sort of the medical terminology to the jury. I just thought he was really strong. And what he said, that line that you just said there, is really, I think, probably the single most damning testimony for the defense so far. Because when you think about it, that's what this whole case comes down to, right? Would this cop putting his knee the way he did on anyone's neck for that long, for that 9-minute period, have killed them? This guy says absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the defense even going and asking him that. They were, trying to make the argument again that Floyd died of drugs and other medical conditions. The defense lawyer asking this expert about it, and he, in plain English, said, "Nope, not a factor." Yeah. Like it right. His death was caused by Derek Chauvin kneeling on his neck. The defense has their own witnesses after the prosecution wraps up. It's hard to see though where they go from here, but the jurors. Reportedly paying very close attention to this witness to this witness who was testifying, taking notes, and as you say, a medical expert can tend to be a little bit boring, but he was like really he was like gripping them, and he was saying, he said to the jury, put your hand on your neck. He was really engaging them, and so probably quite effective.
And just if you've been in jury duty, you know how it can be hard to follow along in some of these cases, right? I mean, I've never been a juror in a murder trial, but I can imagine it's really tough. That's a tough job.
Reportedly, some of the jurors at some of the other medical testimony were like yawning. One of them was kind of had their eyes closed. Understandable. They're sitting there for hours.
Yeah, those uncomfortable chairs.
Quite engaging. Okay, some breaking news overnight when it comes to that Amazon union vote. Amazon holding a wide lead in the Bessemer, Alabama union vote. About half of the ballots have been counted as of this morning. So far, there are 1,100 votes against unionization and 463 in support. The union needs to win at least half of the votes to be recognized. Not looking good for them.
Yeah, I think there's 3,500 total votes. So I guess the next 500 or so votes could tell us something here. They'll continue counting those this morning, so we'll probably have some news. The retail union that led this organizing effort is calling for a probe into Amazon's conduct during this election. They're claiming there's a claim out there that Amazon improperly had a USPS ballot drop box installed at the fulfillment center. Amazon says it just did that to make voting easier. So yeah, 2-1 margin against, though, not looking good for the pro-union side of this. You're very happy if you're Jeff Bezos this morning.
But I'm somewhat surprised because it seemed like there was a lot of support for this movement, at least while they were organizing it.
Yeah, I thought so. I guess you never really know with these things, right? It's one thing to hear people in the media say why it should happen, but the people who actually work in these jobs. I mean, look, they're subjected to a lot of propaganda from the company. That's just how these things often work. I saw it even with Becky when she was unionizing at her former job. But yeah, I mean, they vote, and this is what they're voting for.
Look, we'll follow this story. I guess we'll know in a few days. It's painstakingly slow. I feel like they pore over each ballot and kind of go over every single part of it. We'll know in a couple of days how this is going to turn out, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot of interviews with people who work there.
Sure.
Netflix is going to be the streaming home to Sony Pictures Entertainment movies for the next few years. Starting in 2022, all of the studio's movies are going to go to Netflix after their theatrical runs, and that includes the Marvel franchise owned by Sony, such as Spider-Man and Venom. Netflix has been mostly Marvel free ever since Disney pulled its content for Disney Plus. This is pretty big news, Carlo.
Yeah, I mean, look, Netflix needs franchises, right? That's what we were talking about last week when they spent, what was it, $500 million for those Knives Out movies. God knows how much the Sony deal is, but it's pretty much so they can get Spider-Man. That's the prize here, the Spider-Man movies. Also, this is separate, but also kind of related. Warner Media's CEO came out yesterday and just reiterated that the thing that they're doing with putting all of their movies day and date on HBO Max and in theaters, that's a one-time thing. They're not going to repeat it next year, so they're clearly under pressure from theater owners not to do that. I mean, trying to put the genie back in the bottle, I don't know if it's that easy. I guess we'll find out, right?
I preferred the toothpaste back in the tube metaphor, Carlo.
Okay, all right, noted.
It's more visual. I
Right.
always think
that is a great one.
Yeah, that's going to be hard.
It is hard to do. It's really hard.
Yes, some new music alert. 5 years after Prince died, his estate is now prepping a new album of never before heard music. It's going to be released this summer. The album was recorded in 2010. It's called Welcome to America, the number 2. It's going to be dropping on streaming services on July 30th. The title track was just released yesterday. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift just dropped the re-record of her 2008 album, Fearless, including 6 previously unheard songs.
Oh, we know what Jill's doing this weekend. Driving around Long Island, listening to Taylor Swift.
You know me too.
Remember when
well,
you did
Carlo.
that? Remember when you did that last summer and I made fun of you? No, that's what last summer, man. Last summer it was weird. That was like the
We
most
were
exciting
all in a
thing.
weird place. No judgment,
Yes.
please.
No, you're absolutely right. No judgment. And there's no judgment at all for anything from like the last year, right? I'm not, whatever you got to do to get through. Prince, man, Prince died 5 years ago. That was a tough one. I still remember exactly where I were when that one happened. God, he still, to this day, I think that he still did the best Super Bowl halftime performance of all time.
I would
go
agree
watch
with
that. Go watch that on YouTube if you have a few minutes today. It's amazing.
All right, time now for a little bit of Love, Hate, 8. And by the way, if you are a newsletter reader, you'll have noticed that we actually moved Love, Hate, 8 in the newsletter to Fridays as well. This way it is fresh for the podcast. One thing that we love, cherry blossoms. Sure, they're only really gorgeous for 1 week, but it is an amazing week.
You sent me a picture yesterday from the view from your front yard, and you've got 2 cherry blossoms out there. It's amazing.
Yeah, we moved into this house at the end of the summer. So we don't know what this house looks like in spring. And you know, just what trees exist here. And it's been just incredible. And it's crazy how quickly these trees blossom, because a week ago there was nothing on them. I mean, it was like little buds on the branches, but it's incredibly beautiful. My daughter loves looking at them. It's fun. It's nice.
It's the trees are really starting to pop out here in Brooklyn. There's a magnolia tree down the street that is just so beautiful right now. What are the trees that that are beautiful but smell really bad up here? They sort of smell like rotting fish. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Anybody?
Magnolias
I don't know
smell
what those
great
are.
too.
Yeah, it's not the magnolia. Okay, anything. Anyway, moving on. One thing we hate, mask breath. We've talked about this, I think. I think that we've said in the past, like on a mask related Love, Hate, 8, like, when you put your mask on and you just start like sort of breathing in your breath. So I have this new pet theory that I'm testing out here, and you tell me what you think. I think that anti-mask people are like subconsciously reacting to that feeling of like when you just wear a mask and it's just a constant reminder of like your stank breath. Sometimes I'll put my mask on and I'll just start breathing in it, and I'll be like, oh man, I've been subjecting Becky to this all day.
Okay, I'm not even commenting. One thing that we ate, dinner and a cocktail or a glass of wine outside before the pollen, then the humidity and whatever else, the bugs. make it all uncomfortable. It's been a great week of weather here.
This is my argument is this is currently as good as it gets weather-wise. Like high 60s, early spring in the Northeast, sunny, high 60s, not too hot, but you don't even really need a jacket. It's the best. It's the best. And then it'll only be another week or two, and then it'll just be hot and disgusting.
Wah, wah. I feel like you had a
Hmm.
whole thing last year where you were like, this is the weather where I'm wearing shorts and a sweater. Is
Oh yeah,
that,
well that's fall.
am I
That's
remembering
fall.
this correctly?
Shorts and hoodie season is like it. That's runner up to our current weather. That's like late September, early October. That's also very good too.
All right. We're going to leave it there. That is what you need to know for Friday, April 9th. Get outside this weekend and enjoy some great weather.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend, guys.